Welcome to Dedicated. I'm your host, Doug Brunt. Today we are with the great Ken Burns. Since the 1981 release of his documentary Brooklyn Bridge, nominated for the Academy Award, Ken has been the gold standard in documentary filmmaking. His subjects have ranged from political figures like Huey Long, Thomas Jefferson, the Roosevelts, to sports figures like Ali and Jackie Robinson, to literary figures like Mark Twain and Ernest Hemingway, to the subjects of war, national parks, and jazz. He is one of the leading voices of our time, and he is out with a new documentary, Leonardo da Vinci, which premieres Monday, November 18th, tonight at 8 p.m. and 10 p.m., which I understand is double pumping in the biz.
Double pumping, yep.
So episode 1 comes out twice tonight, and episode 2 comes out twice tomorrow night. Da Vinci on PBS, pbs.org, and the PBS app. So do not miss it. I've actually was fortunate enough to get advanced credit, so I have seen it, and it's spectacular.
Thank you.
Ken, welcome. It's great to have you here.
It's my pleasure, Doug. Thank you.
Today, a little green tea.
Little green tea. Hope I'm not crimping your late afternoon style, but... You know.
Well, for the subject of Da Vinci, we need to have our wits about us because
yes, indeed.
He is running hard and fast, so we'll try to keep up. I should also mention that among your many accolades, not least of those is 5 appearances on The Simpsons.
Oh, yeah. My kids, the credibility with my children is so great. I've been made fun of by, the Lenos and the Lettermans and the Colberts and Conans. They don't know that as well as they know The Simpsons. And the fact that their dad is, in some Simpsons is just,
That is amazing. And the repeat business. I mean, it's no Phil Hartman maybe, but you've got Kid Rock beat, I'm pretty sure.
Well, it's no Phil Hartman. That's true. But once they were voicing someone else, and I just said, look, if you're going to make fun of me, let me do it. And then my reward for that was not only that I still get to use my voice, but they invited me into the writer's room for an afternoon, which was...
Oh, that's great.
One of the great experiences of my life.
One of the long-running shows, too. How many?
Yeah.
They're still making them, I think.
They're still making them.
Yeah, it's around 30 seasons,
at
maybe?
At least, it may be more. I've got a daughter who has a PhD in the Beatles, appropriate for your Channel 18, but also a PhD in The Simpsons, knows every episode, seen them 2 or 3 times, can tell you exactly where it is and what happens, and
Oh, that is a cultural badge of honor, for sure. So beginning at the beginning, born in Brooklyn, is it true that you are related to Robert Burns, the poet?
So first, born in Brooklyn, yes. My parents lived on the Upper West Side in Morningside Heights. My dad was doing graduate work. My mom worked at Kings County Hospital in Brooklyn. So I've got to assume that in July of 1953, she had reduced or free maternity there as an employee. So I've spent exactly however long women spent in the hospital
to arrive,
and then went to the Upper West Side to live in Morningside Heights, and then left pretty quickly after that. I've traded shamelessly on it because, as you noted, my first film is on the Brooklyn Bridge. Mm-hmm. When we did the Baseball City series, we followed the Red Sox. I've lived in New England for 50 plus years, and the Dodgers. I've done a portrait of Jackie Robinson, and somehow people have translated it into what neighborhood, and I say Flatbush, but I spent maybe 3 days there and don't remember much about it. All of my daughters and all of my grandchildren live in Brooklyn. So I have not spent a night there, though, since I have a little pied-à-terre. I live in New Hampshire, where they were all raised, but I have a little pied-à-terre in Lower Manhattan, and so I have not spent a night in Brooklyn since the summer of 1953, which is 71 plus years ago.
When you came home in your swaddle.
When I came home in my swaddle, yeah.
And how about the Robert Burns piece?
So the Robert Burns piece is something my grandmother, who got a PhD from Yale in zoology in 1919, told me was true, but nobody could prove it. I did, just normal genealogical search. I did spit in some things for a while, and the New England Historic Genealogical Society got me connected to Abraham Lincoln, 4th cousin and 5th cousin to the Roosevelts, and nothing. But Skip Gates on Finding Your Roots did mitochondrial DNA, which is, and got a hit of a cousin and an aunt, which is close enough for me. The biggest thing is I was on a cultural tour. The State Department sent me to London and to Edinburgh, Glasgow actually, and we had a day off, and I took my then 12 or 13-year-old daughter, number 2 daughter, down to the Burns cottage. And we'd always seen his picture as a kind of silhouette or just an engraving in the frontispiece of a book. And there was a color painting of him there. And it's stunned because my daughter Lily and I look alike, and it was us.
Wow.
And I walked into the adjoining bookshop, and the 2 matrons just dropped their jaws, and I reached into my wallet and said, I am Kenneth Loren Burns. I would have been Mick Loren, but my parents liked Lauren Bacall, so they cut the Mick off, and and they just, from then on, we were family, literally family. So I'd known back in, this was 99, and it wasn't until whatever it was Skip, like 2015 or 2016, that I could actually finally, say that,
yeah, it's real.
One of the great Democratic poets, small d Democratic poets of all times, with some of the greatest lines of all times.
Speaking
ever.
of greatest lines, we had my grandmother came from Glasgow through Ellis Island in 1915, and we had this framed little poem by Robert Burns in the dining room, and she would sometimes make us say it before the meal, which is, if I can get it right, and I'll sort of Americanize it because it had the Scottish, jargon, but some have meat and cannot eat, and some would eat that wants it. But we have meat and we can eat, and for the Lord we thank it.
Exactly.
So you know the one.
I have exactly that framed, which I found in an old flea market sometime in the dining room at a little lake cabin that we have in New Hampshire. And I see it every time, and I often say it every time. My favorite thing is I published a book a couple years ago called Our America, which was a history of the United States in still photographs, 1 to a page, like an Aperture magazine monograph, minimal caption, so you're forced to look at it. At least 1 picture a year from 1839, the first known picture, which is a self-portrait that of a gentleman took, and all the way more or less to the present. And it's really my America, and we then in the back have thumbnails of the photographs and a long description, but it's trying to get you to use your right brain to be in it. But I opened it with a quote from Robert Burns, "Oh, it's some power, the gift to give us to see ourselves as others see us," which is the last 2 lines of one of his best poems, if not his best, To a Louse, in which the narrator is this poor country guy, and the lady to the manor born goes into the church freezing cold and is highborn and above all the other congregants, except that he sees a louse walking on her hair, and it equalizes all of us. And he has, "Oh, with some power, the gift to give us to see ourselves as others see us."
That is a great line. I always admire people who have self-awareness. They're able to, you're constantly looking at people like, do you have any idea how you appear to other people right now? If you did, you would not be acting that way.
Well, I think it's
a real gift to be able to do it.
That's the key. And he understood it even in To a Mouse, which is more famous. He's disrupting the home of a mouse, and he sees this in a cosmological way, in much the same way Leonardo, who I know we'll get to talk about, thinks about things. He just sees it in the macro and the micro. He's the giant that is disturbing this world of this mouse as his plow goes through the furrow and disrupts the whole thing.
You turn 17, you get a camera, 8mm, shooting 8mm film, and you start, at that time it was Ann Arbor, I think, you started doing a film on?
Yeah, you know what? Much is made of that 8mm camera. I did get one. I was so discombobulated. We try to make sort of documentaries of pollution, environmental concerns were just beginning to bubble to the surface. We'd also try to go follow through on some ridiculous dramatic stuff, whether it's Raymond Chandler mysteries or some sci-fi thing. What I remember more than anything is seeing movies with my dad, like every kind of movies, old silent films, French New Wave, which was just happening, Hollywood stuff, experimental things at the Ann Arbor Film Festival, the works of Stan Brakhage and other things. So I was getting this massive education. And to me, I wanted to study the theory of film. But when I saw my dad cry at a movie, after my mom died, Odd Man Out by Sir Carol Reed, about James Mason, about the Irish troubles in the teens and 20s of the 20th century. And I just decided, never seen my dad cry, not when she was sick, not when she died, not at the impossibly sad funeral. And I just said, this is what I want to be. I realized that whatever cards he'd been dealt, he'd been found no way to express. And the fact that there was in this movie, somehow the permission to be himself and every other part of his life did not permit that. I said I wanted to be that, which in 1965, when I was now 12, my mother had died when I was, almost 12, meant Alfred Hitchcock, John Ford, Howard Hawks, all directors that I love. I just watched Rio Bravo, one of the greatest Westerns ever by Howard Hawks, and remembered watching it with my dad, and I've seen it 10 or 15 times. Improbable cast: John Wayne, the most extraordinarily beautiful woman in the 60s, Angie Dickinson, and Dean Martin as a drunk, and Ricky Nelson because he was a heartthrob, and Walter Brennan with a limp and an accent. Just fantastic Western. But those are the things, and I ended up going to Hampshire College in Amherst, Massachusetts. New experimental school, still is fantastic. I wouldn't be talking to you if I hadn't gone there. And all of their teachers were social documentary still photographers and filmmakers. And so all of a sudden I was going to be with this wealth of unbelievable feature film information, was going to be suddenly a documentary filmmaker. And it wasn't, I barely graduated and I was already into history.
It's interesting to hear your early love for it, because one of the things I wanted to ask you about is if you're a subscriber to the sort of 10,000 hours rule of Gladwell, and where you can get it. If you listen to Quentin Tarantino, for example, he was such an early lover of film. Yeah. And that's how I think he developed a lot of his way of, he just had many influences, and, and that sort of, those counted as some of the hours, I think, for him in developing his craft. I know you're also a cinematographer at the BBC. What are your thoughts on sort of the 10,000 hour thing and your early love of viewing the film as opposed to just working on them as well?
I really was surprised that I was going to make a decision to be a filmmaker as a result of seeing my dad. It took me a long time to even find the clutch and to put it into gear to make it happen. And Hampshire really permitted that. But I'd seen hundreds, if not thousands, of films. I'd kept 3x5 cards and I'd write about them. And it might be Luis Buñuel and surrealism, and it might be Akira Kurosawa, or it might be City Lights by Charlie Chaplin, or The General by Buster Keaton, or it might be new American stuff that was happening. Big, British things like Bridge Over the River Kwai and Dr. Zhivago by David Lean.
Meanwhile, the audience right now is scribbling furiously. All these titles, I got to go watch this.
Also, and they're all worth it. And some of them were just stuff you grew up with, like on the 4:30 movie when you got home from school. There's a movie before dinner, and you'd watch it and be, mostly B movies, but some great stuff. We always watched It's a Wonderful Life in our family. I always still think the American dialectic is choosing between Pottersville or Bedford Falls.
Totally, that's right.
It's just, and I say that
we watch that one every year too.
Every campaign, because it's just one of the more perfect movies. I had the great privilege of meeting Jimmy Stewart. He said it was his favorite film, and it was
not a big hit when it first came out.
Not a big hit, and it was
following.
And it was
time.
Frank Capra's, like Citizen Kane was not a big hit. Frank Capra's favorite movie as well, the director. And if you think about it, you step back and you go, what is this about? It's a very long film. It's 2.5 hours long. And it's about a guy, the hero, who wants to commit suicide.
Right.
And this is like the most enduring Christmas thing. And it comes down to who am I? What am I worth? What do I mean to other people? How is it that we build community? I mean, these are all essential things that are still operating now.
Different kinds of people. People are fall into one of two groups. Some people are depressed by it. I know lots of people don't like that movie because it makes them sad. Others are totally inspired by it.
Totally. You have to be totally inspired by it. I mean, just think. He makes a choice at some point to live in Bedford Falls, not to die in Pottersville. Right? Mm-hmm. This is the thing. And Pottersville is all acquisitive. There's nothing transformational. Bedford Falls is all about community, about welcoming new people, immigrants. Mm-hmm. That's not what Pottersville about. It's all about the almighty dollar. It's all transactional. Mm-hmm. Whereas Pottersville is about providing a circumstance for transformation. I'm describing my work. I'm describing the work of so many people that I admire, and it's like the Christmas film that
we watch it every year, and now with flexibility, we pick the night. And in the old days, we were dictated by the TV guide, which is no longer a thing. That movie, more than any, really does remind me of the TV guide, because we'd get it and figure out where it was going to be,
where it's going to play,
which night are we going to be watching it.
And remember that there are always commercials, and so you're committing to 3+ hours because of the length of the film and the complicated narrative. And Donna Reed is amazing. All the other, stock characters are fantastic in it, and it's Jimmy Stewart's favorite role. And this is a guy who's a major movie star who's got lots of unbelievable credits. You could easily pick 5 or 6 other films. Vertigo, is one of the great Alfred, if not the greatest Alfred Hitchcock film. So,
That is, I didn't realize that about him, that he had said that was the one.
He said it was his favorite.
It's definitely the one I've seen the most of his, and I've seen a lot.
Harvey. He's got the pet rabbit, Elwood P. Dow. That's his film, and he puts it together in a way that I can't imagine, with the exception of maybe Tom Hanks, somebody who could carry as many different romantic, action, funny, comedy, all sorts of stuff, and do it with this aplomb that makes you never second guess that of course he'd be. Yeah. Of course, there's an invisible.
I remember
rabbit.
growing up on Bosom Buddies with Tom Hanks, and then you see him do every other kind of film out there.
I've had the great privilege of having friendship with him for the last 20 plus years. I've used him as a voice off camera in many of our films, and he's been the difference. I'm working right now on a big series on the history of the American Revolution, and I told him, I can't make you George Washington as much as I want to. This is the toughest role to act, but every voice he read, 12 or 15 different voices, they're all in.
Yeah.
And he just can inhabit it, and you can say to yourself, that's Tom Hanks, but before you've even formed the thought, you're paying attention to the meaning of it, which is you didn't fall out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. At his stature.
At his stature. And the fact that he does this, Meryl Streep does this for us and reads, and we're not paying them, we're paying them the SAG minimum. And I always tease them, just don't spend this $414.39 all at once, save part of it.
Well, they do it because they love you and they admire the work.
I love them, and they're the best. And we don't do it because they're celebrities. We do it because they're really great
they're
readers.
Talented.
Yeah. Morgan Freeman does this. It's so generous.
Oh my God. Best voice on the planet.
Best voice on the planet. Samuel L. Jackson. He is, I learned this recently, is that if you add up the box office of all his films, he's the best.
Samuel
L. Jackson. Wow. His movies are more than anybody else's.
Snakes on a Plane. That did deliver. I've quoted it many times, actually. So 1977 comes along. You begin work on what will be your first documentary, the Brooklyn Bridge, which inspired by David McCullough's book, The Great Bridge, which I also loved that book.
It's a really great book.
My
best friend, still my best friend, was a book salesman for Avon Books, and he threw a trade paperback edition of The Great Bridge on my bed when I had, in 76, early 77, pneumonia. And I read it in one gulp and went out to my partners in my pajamas and said, this is our next film. They thought I had lost my mind. And what I wanted was to do a 2-part thing. David's is about the building, but I also wanted to do the bridge as a symbol in popular culture of strength, vitality, ingenuity, and promise, because it's arguably the greatest American work of art of the 19th century. And I believe that. And I walk over it.
Admired by Europeans. Everyone's coming over to
walk over it
this marvel
as many times as I can. Sometimes it'll be 8 or 10 times a week. And it is, I see something new every single time. It's a spectacular work of art. And the story of its construction, which is David's book, is so dramatic that you can't make it up. And so it was there that I'd begun to pioneer, like moving through photographs and using first-person voices in addition to third-person narrator.
He did the narration for you a lot.
And then I convinced him. I'd already done an interview with him, but he wasn't interested in doing the narration. I finally said, you're the person who knows it. Everybody wants me to get some voice, I said, but you know this stuff. And so I broke a few habits. I can't call them habits, but just styles of reading. And he just did it and, narrated most of the next 5 or 6
So how did you pull this off? You mentioned this is our next film, but you were sort of mid-20s or so. How did you get the resources and the backing to do a film that became Academy Award-winning level film? How did it all get going? How did you marshal the resources and the support?
I looked 12. and people delighted in telling me that this child is trying to sell them the Brooklyn Bridge. No. And they'd slam the door, the proverbial, the metaphorical door. I used to keep on my desk, I now can't find them, 2 gigantic 3-ring binders with all of the rejections, running to several hundred for that. So collecting $1,000 or $1,200 or $2,500 was just a big deal. And I shot most of it we began shooting in 77, but it wasn't really until I got any money from grants and things like that I was able to begin shooting in earnest in 79. And by the time I'd hit June of 79, I needed a real job. I was starving. And so I moved up to the village in New Hampshire, to the house, to the bedroom I still sleep in 45 years ago, and figured out with my then wife how to edit it. And
wow.
And actually not wife to be, mother of my first two daughters, how to do it. And then suddenly it was nominated for an Academy Award, and people assumed that I would leave and come back to New York or to move to LA. And I said, no, I'm staying there, which was the best decision I ever made. Second best was moving up there. First was to stay once there was a modicum of success, because the kind of work we do is so labor intensive, and it felt like we were inventing the wheel of how to edit it and put it together and treat it. Nobody said, an hour for a film. I said, yeah, I'm having a hard time keeping it to an hour. Now, 20 hours of Vietnam, stuff like that. But it was like how to tell stories with old photographs, and how to tell stories with documents and paintings and drawings and live cinematography mixed in there.
I have a bit of a section on process I want to get to in a bit, because I want to hear about that, and I want to hear how that's evolved over the 40 plus years that you've been doing this, because of course the American attention span has evolved and things like that too. But there was one other documentary I wanted to raise with you. This is a show mainly for authors, and you do a lot of writing for these as well. So people are fascinated to hear from you. But the one on Hemingway, a more recent one, I was so excited for it to come out. I devoured it, of course, through the screen, and I have revered Hemingway since I was a kid, and so it changed him a little bit for me, because you're so raw and honest with it, which is what I have always admired about your work. It didn't change my love for Hemingway's writing, which is unchanged. He's talented. He changed the language. He's an important writer. But it did change how I revered him as a person, because he's such a personal fraud. I felt so naive for admiring he has this persona, this mystique and romance around his persona. He's one of those writers that makes a person want to be a writer. Yes. But then you find out that mystique is like, he's a self-fabulist. Like, he invented all this stuff about himself. Yeah,
it's true of a lot of people that all of a sudden the PR, the self-PR, the PR that you allow others to promote, catch up and overtake you. Another of 18 million good reasons why I still live in Walpole, New Hampshire, where, any notoriety, nominations, Emmy Awards, and 50 cents get you a cup of coffee. You know what I mean? It's just nobody is standing on that. And that's really important. The interesting thing is that, and I think you can give him back a little bit of your love. Obviously, literarily, he may be the greatest writer in America. I mean, Herman Melville and Willa Cather, and of course, Mark Twain, the subject of another film, give him a very serious run for the money. And then we say the word American. And could you add Gabriel Garcia Marquez? Because he's an American too. He just happens to live in Central and South America. So, it's an insecurity. And what it turns out is this most masculine, almost toxically masculine male has a great deal of gender insecurity. He's very fluid. And with his wives, he role plays in which he plays the girl and they play the boy, and he gets her to cut their hair and to run his long. Edna O'Brien, who is in the film, is a great writer. She loves him and sees his ability to write about women as unequaled. And if you think about some of his early short stories, the things like Up in Michigan, which is date rape. You've got Indian Camp. There's an amazing sensitivity to the feelings of women, and this was not something any male writer was doing, and yet he was. And I think the fear that he would be seen as not the figure that he wanted to be, is a deceit, which you can rightfully recoil from. But it's also, it may have been the necessary mask for him to actually then explore in the depth that he explored the complexities of human relationships and the idea, Doug, that there is nothing binary in the world, and that the binary imposition is a human one, the white and black, the good and bad, the old and young, the gay and straight, the whatever it is. And so if he cops to a pose, we all cop to a pose, maybe not with the same degree of lack of self-awareness, Burnsian self-awareness, but he's nevertheless, in whatever compromises he made, and he made a lot and dies by his own hand, and please don't do that, he left us with an extraordinary bit of writing, utterly American writing that translates all around the world. Yeah. All around the world.
Yeah, we're numb to it now because so many people have been influenced by it. So we see things closer to it. But it really, imagine reading Hemingway when he first came out in the 1920s. It would sounded so different from everything. It would have been much more affecting, I think, than it is today. But he really did change, which is why he's credited with having changed the language.
He's changed it. And so did Twain. He suddenly stopped writing the way James Fenimore Cooper was writing, meaning emulating British writers. He wrote with the bark on, as he said, Lincoln spoke. And Twain and Hemingway comes along and does something else. And, I think sometimes we turn off the tape recorder and stop it, There's other people who have added to it so significantly, I think. But yeah, he's wonderful. And I think taking him in his whole is really important, as it is in all stories. I have in the editing room a neon sign, the main editing room, in cursive, small, that says it's complicated. There's not a filmmaker alive that when a scene is working doesn't want to leave it alone. But when you find new and contradictory and sometimes destabilizing information, it's really important to destabilize it.
That's such a great answer on Hemingway, because you have such a balanced approach to it. It's nuanced, and you're presenting everything. You manage to not be swayed one way or the other. Some people might have found that out and be like, this guy's terrible, and I'm going to portray him as terrible. You just put it out there in a nuanced, subtle way, and then a viewer, it's more powerful that way. The viewer takes it in, and they're going to make their decisions, but you're not making them for you. You're not making them for the viewer, which leads me to another question I'm dying to get your thoughts on, because we do see the other way happening an awful lot. Right. There's a rash of docuseries, docudramas where people, they either fall in love with their subject, which any biographer of a book or documentary film can do. You can fall in love a little bit and you heroize the person, or conversely villainize a person. That's and people have a tendency to want to move to the extremes, either for dramatic effect or they just unconsciously do it. And Netflix, for example, has so many docuseries, docudramas, they can't call them documentaries anymore. No. I think there's something like 19 lawsuits against Netflix right now because subjects feel they've been treated unfairly. Living people feel they've been treated unfairly or unfactually in some of these documentaries. I want to get your thoughts on that trend that we're seeing out there.
I mean, the hagiography or the sort of critical thing is just two sides of the same coin. You want to just call balls and strikes. That's the only thing that works, is what happened. And I think you also see this spate of films in which people who are the subject or are related to the subject are in the producing side of things. And I've spent my entire life in public television, and maybe I'm completely out of it, but that doesn't wash with them. Right. It doesn't wash with me. There's got to be some kind of integrity where your audience knows that that person, the subject of the film, or their widow or their brother or their child isn't sitting in the editing room saying, don't show that. Yeah. And I want to assure people that we've not been influenced. The choices that we make and you would assume that making a film, a big, long documentary film that tests the attention span, is additive. It's not. It's subtractive. And all good work is pulling out the scaffolding and false work of all the stuff that you've collected. So the cutting room floor is filled with stuff that's not bad. It's good. It just doesn't fit, like Amadeus, too many notes. And so you're trying to always figure out what those notes are that you can do, but it has to be based on the the thing, it's complicated because that's the human story. Richard Powers, a great novelist, said the best arguments in the world won't change anybody's point of view. The only thing that can do that is a good story. Because what do good stories contain? Wynton Marsalis said this to me in jazz. Sometimes a thing and the opposite of a thing are true at the same time. Right? So stories contain that. Stories understand that you can have undertow in a particularly placid, seemingly placid bit of water. And that's what you have to understand. It's true for Leonardo. It's true for Ernest Hemingway. It's true for Mark Twain. It's true for you. It's true for me. It's true for everybody. And we recognize that. And, to your attention span thing, yeah, there's always distractions. There have been distractions as long as there have been people, but we're now binging things, which is our own self-regulation. We know that all meaning accrues in duration. So, it's okay to have cats with balls of yarn, but, we're also into understanding that all real meaning accrues in duration. And so I'm going to spend that 20 hours with Vietnam, or the 4 with Leonardo, or the 6 with Ernest Hemingway.
Oh, well, that's why you're the gold standard, I think, because, there are so many of these. The Jordan did a documentary where he was very involved. The Menendez brothers one is out there, and they invented a relationship between the brothers for which there's no evidence and things like that. So these things, it's not something you can pull off the shelf years later and be like, this is how I'm going to learn about that subject, because it's really actually fiction. It's not.
Yeah. So, let's say something positive about fiction to begin with. So one of the best fiction writers that I know conflated characters, invented people, changed countries, moved stories around, and his name is William Shakespeare. So we don't want to in any way proscribe people understanding that sometimes the biggest truths have come from fictionalized events. The problem is when you pass this off as what happened, and you don't know whether somebody was saying, don't put that in, I don't look good there. And what do you do about that?
You're misleading. There's a big difference.
And so even with Leonardo, who we have very little tick-tock of the tabloid stuff of his life, so we have thousands of pages of his philosophizing, so we want to get inside his head, but you also don't want to sort of run with some of the sort of hot topics. He's born out of wedlock. He seems to be a gay man. You can make more of that if you want to, but then haven't you put your thumb on the scale? Let's just go with what we know. It may, in fact, be that the born out of wedlock, which did not allow him to go to university, might be the saving grace, because he's a man without letters, almost sans lettere, he says. And he's proud of it because he realizes at the end of his life, he knows more than any scholar in any discipline. Yeah. He knows everything, but he didn't get it the old-fashioned way, which made him in silo all of these things. The Mona Lisa is a great work of science, and the anatomies are great works of art. And he would chastise. I can hear his voice in my head now saying, why did you even have to make a dichotomy of science and arts? It's all the same thing. It's all an overwhelming curiosity about the universe. And as Guillermo del Toro, the filmmaker, says in our film about Leonardo, that knowledge and imagination are deeply rooted together, and that he had this great privilege. His duty was to interrogate the universe. Yeah. So what does that mean? Who am I? What is the nature of the universe? Why am I here? Where am I going? What am I supposed to do? All of these things that we conveniently spend most of our days avoiding, he's asking every single day of the year. And that's the calling balls and strikes on the world, the observational balls and strikes, which I recognize and appreciate.
There are some great lines in the documentaries we'll get to in a second. But one I'll just mention now because you're right on it, is there's a line in there, his dissatisfaction with received wisdom. So, which I love that, And
so the Renaissance,
he received less because he was not formally educated. And
in one way, he receives everything because nature is his great teacher, and nature is perfect, right? But the Renaissance is the reabsorbing of classical training. Like we've had a dark age, they're dark because the lights turned off. Right? So you're importing Aristotle and Plato and Archimedes and Galen and all of these people, and everybody's receiving it, and they're having a rebirth of human knowledge. But the Renaissance also means that you're getting input from a non-observational cultures, like Muslims are doing experimentations, are mathematical. There's Asian stuff, and so he's both observationally a genius, but he's also experimentally a genius. And so he's just questioning. He is not accepting as dogma. Let's just take one example, the human heart. Galen had insisted, the great Greek physician, 1,300 years before Leonardo, is suggesting there are two chambers in the heart. Well, his own dissections of human beings, nobody's doing that. He's an artist, he's doing that, suggests that there are four. He also, with using an ox heart as a model, builds a model of a heart, and he uses silk as the valves, and he puts grass seed in water. He knows all about water dynamics, mimicking the flow of blood. There's no purpose whatsoever while he's alive for this. None. Nobody operates.
No one's doing heart surgery.
There's no heart surgery. Nobody would ever think of doing heart surgery, but he's observed a man he says his arteries and his veins are silted up. He knows about water dynamics. He knows about rivers and streams. It's silted up. It's the beginning of heart disease. He's seeing it, but nobody's thinking they're going to do anything about it. And it's not for 450 or 475 years after this that MRIs permitted us to understand that his description of how heart valves work was exactly how they worked. And there was not a practical application at the time. He did it for the sake of the knowledge so that he could paint the most famous painting in the world. And a few decades after his death, Vasari, one of his early biographers and admirers, is pondering the Mona Lisa's face and drops down. He says, "But I can see her pulse beating in her neck." So he had made, not just he could make her dimensional, this two-dimensional paint and pigment on a poplar panel, and he could make her real, but he could make her alive, real in time. And that's
so much beyond a photograph even. There's a great line in the thing too, in your documentary too, saying it was understanding just for the sake of understanding. There was no practical purpose for it.
No practical purpose
whatsoever.
So you're challenging
relentless curiosity.
I mean, this is Kenneth Clark said he's the most curious man, and that's what it is. And people often ask me, "What do you want people to take away from your film?" I say, "Nothing. We've worked 10.5 years on Vietnam. We have our own sets of things. We made it. It's you to take away what you like. You can be angry. You can be sad. You can be disappointed. You can be all of those things. You can want to know more. You can want to know less. You can close your eyes to this and open them for that." But this is a one in which when you're spend years, as Sarah Burns, my oldest daughter, and her husband David McMahon, collaborators with me, co-directors, and they're the writers, so it's in some ways much more their film than mine. When you've been in contact with this guy for a long time, you just want to be more like him. You want to be more attentive to nature. You want to be more attentive to everything, to how human beings react. He wanted to paint people not just what they look like, but what he said was the intentions of their mind, meaning what were they thinking? What were they feeling? What's their inner life like? And it's that, not just he's the greatest painter of the age and understands through the techniques of Somato and chiaroscuro to make the gradations happen imperceptibly over hundreds of layers of paint, but that you do feel like that maybe the heart is beating. And that makes him, as one of our scholars, Francesco Borga says, a painter god. Yeah. And that's a big deal. That's a big deal.
So a quick section on process before we do a deeper dive on Da Vinci, because I have tons of questions for you on that. With your process in general, how do you select a subject? What are elements in a story that you're looking for to take on?
It's not a specific element. It's just a good story. So we never take stuff we know about. It's stuff we want to know about. A lot of people tell you what you should know, meaning what they already knew. And we'd rather share with you a process of discovery. So the process is pretty interesting. There's normally a traditional research period, followed by the script period, which informs shooting and editing, boom, done. We never stop researching. We never stop writing. We actually never stop shooting. And it attenuates the editing process where it's all made. It's the most glorious part of the process. As great as it is to interview somebody like Guillermo del Toro and hear the music, all the best interviews, the most rare and never before seen stuff, all of the filmic grammar that Sarah and Dave helped sort of insist that we try this. Sarah says that Leonardo's such a lateral thinker that we can split the screen. We can divide it into 4, into 6, to 8, to 12. And why are we tied to the late 15th and early 16th century? Why not show a rocket ship? Why not show an airplane? Why not show this and liberate the filmic grammar? It's still very much the same process. And we're still just trying to tell a story in all the laws of poetics, which, you can read. It's pretty easy essay to read that we all follow. You follow, I follow, Amor follows, Steven Spielberg follows, Quentin Tarantino follows, even when he's messing up the time signature. There's still an adherence to that. So for us, it's just being open to the end, understanding the complexity, and being corrigible up to the very end. So I'm finishing a massive film on the history of the American Revolution. Then I'm the scratch narrator for years in the editing room, and then we bring in this case, not Keith David who narrates Leonardo, but Peter Coyote, and
he's great.
And we're bringing him back because we have 100 little tiny things. We found out it wasn't Thursday, it was Friday. It wasn't 6, it was 4. It wasn't. You know what I'm saying?
Would you ever do a screening to the audience, and then a lot of commercial films, not documentaries, I think, maybe they do, but is there ever a screening to an audience and then you get some feedback and you think, all right, we're going to make some adjustments here or there?
So there's a kind of technical panel stuff that people do that they're using folks who don't know anything, and they're just letting a kind of populace. We mostly, our screenings are for ourselves and our scholars, right? And they're saying that missing, not too much emphasis here, not enough emphasis there. But gradually, as it's beginning to congeal and to form, you start bringing in what we call warm bodies, people we know, and they aren't filmmakers and they're not experts on Leonardo, right? Or the revolution. But we watch them watch it. And we don't follow what they say, but we watch them where they fall out and where we fall out, watching it with them and those sorts of things, and then listen very astutely to their questions. Like, was it really that he did this? And so you go, so that wasn't as clear as we presumed it was. And so you do little tiny adjustments. It's the scholars that are mostly important, that are, and it isn't just one scholar. We never based anything on one person's book. As you see, this film has a kind of inner moat around the castle of Leonardo of historians and art historians and biographers. But the outer thing is writers and painters and heart surgeons and engineers and filmmakers and theater directors. And so they're telling you in some way, Leonardo is the most modern of subjects we've taken. He intersects in my life in this way. It might be the notebooks of Guillermo del Toro that look a little bit like the codexes of Leonardo, with fanciful drawings of the creatures that populate his films, along with texts and writings and ruminations. Or it may be just putting some of Leonardo's lyricism to theater, taking the codexes and doing that. Or it might be an engineer marveling at what he understood centuries before anyone else understood about lift and drag and gravity and all the principles of aerodynamics. Or somebody who's interested in heart surgery marveling at the ability to describe exactly how it works. So all of that is a way of just gathering in all these views, and then it becomes your thing to sort of say, you know what, I do want to concentrate more. I do want to see more. I do want to observe more. I do want to ask more questions. I want to challenge received wisdom. I want to find some sort of future thing. And Leonardo's the guy. There's nobody. It's nothing like it. If we use 10% of our brain, he's using 75%.
Yeah. He is extraordinary. I since reading Isaacson's book years back, I have been fascinated with him. But last question on process. Has your process changed in the 40 plus years you've been doing this? We talked briefly about, the attention span of Americans and our sort of Instagram shorts phase, which combined with, though, as you said earlier, the opposite of a thing can be true. We also have podcasts and Joe Rogan and 3-hour podcast things where people settle in and go deep.
All meaning a cruise in duration. So Cats with Balls of Yarn. I was told when the Civil War came out, because of MTV, no one is going to watch it. It's really good, Ken, but no one's going to watch it. It's still the highest rated program in the history of PBS.
So your process is largely the same since 77?
It's largely the same. We delayed by 10 years from 90 to, we waited till 2001 to switch to digital editing. So it was all analog. It didn't want the technological tail ever to wag the dog. I didn't want to spend all sorts of stuff on the first 10 minutes of bells and whistles and then forget the last 18 hours, right? And so jazz was, the last one we cut by hand, and we're drawing fades on stuff. And then, we moved to that, but we still kept shooting film, and we probably went 10 years later to film. I just wanted to feel comfortable so that we could continue to do it the way we always had. Maybe we're not writing it out on a legal pad. It's the equivalent of word processing, but we want the story to direct, not the tools that we have to direct. And that's part of the problem of the modern world, that things have gotten, the tail is wagging the dog in too many ways with technological advances. You can even see as AI begins to fill the space of our consciousness in so many ways, just a simple Google search or ads on TV. It's that I haven't really read this thing, or I wrote this thing and it's not very good, but if I press this button, it will now give me a perfect example, a perfect précis of what we're doing. And that's, it makes me shudder. I'm sure it would make Ernest Hemingway shudder. I'm sure it would make Amor Towle and you shudder to think that there would be a button that would be a shortcut to something, right?
There's that Robert Downey Jr. play out. I don't know if you saw that, called McNeil. And my wife and I just went to see it a month ago or so. And he'll say, write a story in the style of Hemingway or something like that, and out comes the thing. Did you test that at all with Da Vinci to see if it would be factually accurate?
No. It's so interesting because there would be, given the extensive canon of work that I have, that you could feed in all the scripts and say, we're doing something on this, write a script. I would never, for a million years. It's like, it's like making love. You either want to do it or you don't want to do it. If you're a writer, let's write. If you're a filmmaker, let's film. The shortcuts, we think it's like a gated community to me. It's like we presume that if we just have the right amount of money, that if we just buy the right blue jeans and drive the right car and have the right handbag and live in the gated community, that the inevitable vicissitudes of life won't visit us. They're called inevitable for the reason none of us get out of here alive. And I would wager, I know it's true for me, death of a mother, other things, that the defining parts of our life are the painful ones, are the difficult ones. These are the crucibles out of which character, even virtue, emerge, rather than the comfort we're always trying to seek. The shortest distance between 2 points is what AI is saying, and it will revolutionize lots of things. But the last thing you want to do is to have it replace what human beings do really well.
I know you mentioned your mother passed from breast cancer when you were 11, and I read that you said that every one of your films is at least indirectly about her.
So my father-in-law, my late father-in-law, was an eminent psychologist, and I went to him. I was 39 or 40 in a major crisis and personal crisis, and I said to him, I seem to be keeping my mother alive. Like the day that she died, April 28th, is always ahead of me and then always behind me. And it had always been that way. And he looked at me and he said, I bet you blew out the candles when you were a kid growing up, wishing she'd come back. And I go, how did you know? And then he listed all these other things. And he finally looked at me, he says, what do you think you do for a living? He said, you make Jackie Robinson and Abraham Lincoln come alive. Who do you think you're really trying to wake up? You wake the dead. That's what you do for a living. Who do you think you're, and it sounds dime store psychology, but it's not. It comes from and he understood that the essential impulse born of tragedy, and I don't mean like she got sick and died. She was sick for all of my life that I was aware. And there was always this sort of Damocles hanging over the family. So that by the time I was 2 or 3 months short of my 12th birthday, I was 11 and she died. We knew it was happening for years. And it was just the inevitability, the torture of that. But that has made me particularly sensitive to waking the dead and seeing the complexity of human nature as something not to be shunned, not to be figured out in some neat way, but to accept and figure out how to, as I said, call balls and strikes rather than just root for one team or the other.
From those years from 3 to 11 and a half, was she able to participate, or was she
little bit, often in the hospital? I remember when I was 6 or 7, there was a big hospital bed in our living room. She'd disappear. She'd be gone for a third of my life. It was hard for her, and for her, obviously. For me, my younger brother Rick, and my dad. This was just a slow motion death. And she lived a lot longer than she was supposed to, which is a great blessing, and imparted to my brother and me incredible values, and it was an example of such extraordinary courage in the face of a great deal. I can remember her going up a flight of stairs and pulling out a flask and taking just a hit of whiskey just to catch her breath. Not because she needed whiskey to drown her stuff. It was just about breath. As it metastasized, it was drowning her from within. Fortunately, she was taken before that moment came, but it was really, really close and kept up this pretty impressive, cheerful spirit about things. I've never seen anyone like it before.
Yeah, that's hard. But, to your point, but for these painful human moments, this confluence of moments you've had, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing, bringing others back to life.
Friction's inevitable. You just have to figure out what's your relationship with it. I can yell at the guy who's cut me off driving. It's like we're all want to make sure that things run smoothly. But I think that when we look back, the defining moments of our life are born more often than not in darkness and difficulty than they are in perfectly good times. We remember those good times. They're great. They're wonderful. But I think the character is born in these, as I say,
the others
crucibles.
Shape us more. Well, let's spend a little bit more directly on Da Vinci. We've obviously glanced off it here and there. You mentioned something about right brain earlier, and one of the things I took away from both the Isaacson book years ago and your documentary is he's firing on both the left side and the right side in a way that almost no one in history has been able to do.
I don't know who else would come close to him. When the King of France imports him as his last patron, he thinks he's getting Aristotle to his supposed Alexander. Aristotle's fabulous. Aristotle's one of the central thinkers in our Western canon. He's a philosopher. He's, great writer. He's not the greatest painter of his age. He's not an anatomist. He's not a botanist. He doesn't know everything about water dynamics or formation of rocks or clouds or shadow or anatomy. Leonardo is all of those things plus a philosopher and a writer. And so you're thinking, what alien is this? And the right brain, left brain analogy is really apt. He's got that curiosity allows him to develop both sides, or maybe
to make a union between them.
And to make a union, there's no division, and that's what we constantly do. Is we silo things. We've got our channels of what we like and things like that, and we kind of adhere to them. And he's broken down all the barriers.
Did you ever read a book called Art and Physics?
No, but I know about it. I've heard about it, yes.
It's fantastic. The premise, which you probably know, is that art often has anticipated science along the way. So that prior to Einstein's theory of relativity, there were early Cubist painters who were toying with ideas of time and space continuums in their painting.
Yeah, and
then years later, scientists catch up.
I would argue in our jazz series, this wonderful teacher and musician named Matt Glazer, just a wonderful, wonderful human being, just imagines Louis Armstrong, the guy who's broken time in music, right? Because everything is on time in all music, and we know that music has a mathematical and cosmological dimension to it. But here's a guy singing before and after the note. He's swinging, and he has a famous concert in Copenhagen. And my friend was musing. He says, maybe all these guys who are working on quantum mechanics look at him and go, I get it. And in retrospect, Einstein is supposed to have said that that science is there to prove the existence of God, right? And that this is all what it's plowing for. And it seems so antithetical to what the empiricism of science suggests. But if we look at it, that's what art is doing. That's what all of these things are doing. Is 1 and 1 is equaling 3. Like you can't build a bridge or launch a rocket ship if it's not 2. But in our life, in our faith, in our art, and maybe even also in some aspects of our science, 1 and 1 equaling 3 is what the whole message is.
Quick question on jazz, because I don't want to get off Da Vinci for too long, but when you were doing a research for that, did you read But Beautiful by Jeff Dyer?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a great book.
Jeff is a great writer. We love him. I would have interviewed him if I had read it before the series came out. Yeah.
He's terrific. And a good tennis player as well.
Oh, did not know
Dangerous
that.
lefty.
Oh,
serve.
dear.
Yeah. There's a great cast of characters in here.
Yeah.
Because one of the interesting things about Da Vinci is he was celebrated in his time.
Yes.
He worked for kings and things like that. Now, there wasn't really mature intellectual property law, so he wasn't able to get rich. You basically have to find a sponsor.
But he wouldn't
have pursued the money.
No,
really.
And what is that? It's the distraction. It's the root of all evil, we've been told.
Yeah.
The Bible says it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich man to reach the kingdom of heaven. There are people who swear by the Bible and insist this is the only thing there, who have completely ignored its dictum, or and the humility of Leonardo in the face of the immense insignificance that we all are in the face of the universe. He just accepts it with this benignness. Luke says, he that exalted himself will be abased. He that is humble will be exalted. It's not the way our system works these days.
Yeah.
Right? It's all about that. So no, I think the money thing is,
he just needed a roof over his head and time to freedom to explore.
The biggest thing is, how many paintings does he have? Fewer than 20. How many are finished? Fewer than 10. Like you go, what? I thought Vermeer with 36 or whatever it is, that's the least amount, the guy that we have to hoard and do all that stuff. No, it's Leonardo. And among that is the most famous painting of all time, a work he'd never delivered. Right? He abandoned. Yeah. I mean, the first experimental piece of art we think in the Western canon is his Adoration of the Magi, which he walked away. There's even a picture, a self-portrait of him in it. The only character not focused on Christ is him looking the other way. Either all of the questions that he needed to ask had been answered in the work so far, so he's done, or he realized that this was a cul-de-sac. He wasn't going to find the answers to the questions he was searching for, so he needed to go ask other questions.
And so whoever hired him for the commission is deeply frustrated because he's just never going to finish it.
I mean, there's Florentinian...
I was stunned to know the Mona Lisa is something he basically carried around with him his whole life, and would occasionally pop open and fix an eyebrow or something, and his whole life.
He is commissioned by a well-to-do Florentinian silk merchant to paint his 24-year-old wife who's already had 5 children. Yeah. And he never delivers the thing. And it's the most famous painting on earth. It's too much. It's so great.
So he was known. The kings sought his work. He could figure out how to make a map of what a city would look like from the ground, as though it was like give you an overhead view, which had military value. So he was important. He wasn't like Van Gogh, who was not, known until later, but he has grown. I think, one of the interesting things is the cast of characters is amazing. Along comes Michelangelo, who's maybe 20-some years younger than Da Vinci. So Da Vinci's a star. Then Michelangelo's a new star. He's in this crowd of Renaissance characters who are all titans of their age.
And he comes out, and he's taught by Verrocchio, who's really great. And Brunelleschi has come before and built this dome that was, nobody thought would stand, and it's big, a little bit bigger than the Parthenon in Pantheon in Rome, which for 13 years was the biggest thing, and suddenly got a new one. So you're all around you. You've got great works, great artists, but I think he's singular. He's not tortured the way Van Gogh is or Michelangelo is. He might be in competition or jealous of the young upstart who deigns to sign his statue, the David, but with his name. He's not a murderer like Caravaggio. He's not this or that. He's actually, one of the things that Sarah likes to say, Sarah Burns, my daughter, co-director, says, we wanted to rip the beard off Leonardo because we think of him as Gandalf. We think of him as this wise, alchemical person when he's in fact this bon vivant. He loves life. He's funny. He's got millions of friends.
And extremely handsome,
very handsome, gorgeous.
Man.
And he's got friends, and he plays instruments, and he sings, and he stages theatricals. And he's this great inventor of machines, and he's this great scientist and pursuer of questions, and he's this great artist. He's all of these things, and he's beginning to tell us. He continues to tell us, and one of the important things that's to your question is that there's 4,000 to 6,000, depending on who's counting, pages of his various infinities of volumes, one observer said, that tell you everything about not his personal life, not what he's thinking about you or me or how he's upset about this, but there's an occasional grocery list or whatever, or a complaint, but it's mostly what he's thinking. And that's not published in his lifetime. And so what happens is you got his most famous work of art when he's alive, which is The Last Supper, in the dining room of a monastery, not able to be seen by just anybody. He's got a reputation as being really good in lots of different ways. The most famous painting on earth is unknown yet, and it's the reason why it's in the Louvre is because the French king is his final patron who says, do whatever you want. We know that he's great. Everybody knows that he's great, and our Leonardo, but this stuff is going to accrete out over the centuries. Like his treatise on painting is sort of copied by people. So do you think those
personal writings and things are why? Because he's among many titans, but over the centuries, as you say in the documentary, he's been reinvented by each era.
Each generation
and he's sort of risen above the
rediscovers
other titans in a way.
all completely risen above them. And I think none of them have treatises on painting. None of them have treatises on mathematics or treatises on water dynamics or aerodynamics or the flight of birds or, anatomy. I mean, it just keeps coming out and people keep discovering his modernity, his essential modernity, which is so amazing because of all the characters I've spent time with, he's been dead the longest. It's not like Benjamin Franklin, who's been dead, 200 plus years. This is 500 plus years he's been dead. And yet, of all the characters I've gotten to know,
he's as relevant today as any of them.
He's as relevant, and I think you could put him in the present and he'd be okay. He'd go, oh, you got to the moon.
Well, they finally got around to that thing I drew.
How did you do the graph? How did you withstand the graph? I mean, he'd ask the right questions, and I think he'd be a filmmaker because I think he invented film. I think the Last Supper isn't a frozen moment. It's like many seconds. And so because he's able to paint as he's put it, the intentions of their mind, you feel people in time, not just three-dimensional, like that. Nobody is as good as that as he is. Maybe Rembrandt comes close, but you see these people, they're alive and they have lives and there's something beyond it. So I think that he'd be a filmmaker now and putting us all out of business.
Well, thank God those writings have been preserved because there might be writings of others. Did you ever read The Swerve by Stephen Greenblatt?
No.
The premise is the whole Renaissance is really born of these ancient documents. It was On the Nature of Things by Lucretius, and it was in a German monastery, copied again and again and again over the centuries by monks. And then, in the 14th century or so, they're discovered. And so there's this rebirth of ancient wisdom only because these things were found, these scrolls of, and they're only partial things. They found a little bit of meditations by Marcus Aurelius and things like that. So suddenly ancient wisdom is back in the picture.
This is the whole thing of the Renaissance. That's the Renaissance, which is you have contact with the outer world, which is doing things. You're opening up trade for the first time. Remember, you've been beset by pandemic after pandemic after pandemic. You've been in the dark ages. We've lost touch with all of this stuff. The soul has gone out of the human race in a way collectively, and now you're bringing it. And only in isolated monasteries are people copying it. But it's no accident that the year that Leonardo is born is the year that Gutenberg's printing press. So all of a sudden, you're talking about entering an age of mechanical reproduction, right? And it is this great flourishing of trade and culture and languages, and you're taking a Muslim experimental thing to add to your Western observational stuff. You're learning this. I mean, on the simplest levels, Marco Polo is coming back with ravioli and spaghetti, right? Noodles, right? And so that hadn't been in Italy until Marco Polo gets back. So you've got, and we think of the people of raviolis, and we've got a new birth, and they are rediscovering ancient classical wisdom. And then you've got a guy at the heart of it, in the city where it's all happening, in the rooms where it's happening, not just receiving it, but saying, okay, but is this really true, or is it true to this extent? And so you have this beginning of what will issue out of the Renaissance, which is the Age of Enlightenment. And out of the Age of Enlightenment comes experiments like the United States of America, which is an Enlightenment, Masonic, Freemasonic experiment in how human beings could, for the first time in history, not be subjects, but be citizens. And it required lifelong learning, pursuit of happiness, to be virtuous. And this is all coming out of the Renaissance and the Age of Enlightenment. It's so terrifically exciting to begin to connect the dots and go, that's the missing part of the key of the map, and Leonardo fills in for me a huge, huge piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. A couple quick things on just, we talked a lot about Leonardo, but I want to talk a little bit about what a pleasurable experience it is to take in the documentary, because it's the first that you've scored musically. You use footage from different eras, which really resonates in the way that Da Vinci has had all, sort of a different expression in each of these eras. Each era has had their own relationship with him. And you talk to a number of people from different professions and walks of life. So you're kind of dipping through the centuries, dipping through professions, and you've scored it for the first time.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how you put the whole thing together?
David McMahon mostly is that we'd had a lot of temp music, found music, and we were experimenting with it. And one of them was this woman named Caroline Shaw, who's a remarkable composer and participates in a vocal group called Roomful of Teeth that does amazing things with voices. And she works in the studio with So Percussion and the Attaka Quartet and adds bass sometimes to the quartet. And we put them all together. They were in the studio working together, and she agreed to do the entire score, which lifts it up. I mean, let me just say this. All art forms, when it dies and goes to heaven, wants to be music, because Winton says it's the art of the invisible. And so I think that
that's a great line. Write that down.
Having Caroline's music, which is it just lifts it up and cradles him. And then having this expansive thing, which Sarah and Dave also insisted that we could have, this lateral thinking that allowed you to use footage. I can't do that in Benjamin Franklin. I can't do it in the American Revolution, but you can do it in Leonardo da Vinci because he's so lateral. He's thinking these things. He's dreaming for us. He's prophesizing. He gives up on some of these machines because he realizes, the materials aren't, but he's left us with the dream of flight. He's left us with the possibility of this, of a helicopter, of a submarine, of whatever it is everybody thinks incorrectly he invented, the parachute, all of that stuff. He's done the initial dreaming for us, and we're all in a way still part of Leonardo's questing, all of us still.
Well, the experience as a viewer it's really transporting. The sound, the sights, the whole experience really. It's an emotional, transporting, wonderful experience. How did you know 4 hours and not 10, or it just is what it is when you're done?
No, you just sort of, as you're beginning, you spend a lot of time thinking about it. Vietnam was something that I thought was 7. Before I even started talking and trying to raise money, I knew it was 8. And then very early on in the process, I knew it was 10. So here, we first thought maybe it's a single, and then we realized we were dealing with this singular genius, the most curious. How could it possibly be? And we figured out where the division would be, that after the painting of the Last Supper, but now being without a patron because Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan, is deposed at the end of the first episode. He's sort of wandering, but everything really that we know him for, besides the Last Supper, is ahead of him. And and then how to, in some ways, structure it so that even though he gets the commission to paint this silk merchant's wife, because he doesn't deliver it, why not wait until he pulls it out of his belongings to show a visiting cardinal and his entourage in France? And then all of a sudden, in the next to the last moment, the thing that everybody thinks they know and maybe worries that we've forgotten now has a chance to see it anew, where you're stripped her of all the jokes, the Marcel Duchamp painting, the mustache, the all the music, all the literature, all the sense of things that keep us from understanding that the Mona Lisa is the epitome of this painter god, willing inanimate objects to represent an animate person with a beating heart and a psychology and a life and a place and all of these things. And, how can you not be? It doesn't really, the Sarah and Dave are really so responsible for this in every way, but how could even three filmmakers, do anything to Leonardo? He's going to do it for himself and show us, who he is.
Well, it comes through. So before the lightning round, we'll remind the audience, 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. tonight on PBS, pbs.org, and the PBS app is Volume 1, 2 hours, and then 8 and 10 p.m. tonight, and Volume 2 Tuesday, tomorrow night, again 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. for Volume 2, total of 4 hours, and it's transporting. It's awesome.
Thank you. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Well, on to the lightning round.
Okay.
So your favorite book as a kid?
Encyclopedia, the garden book of encyclopedia that my parents bought at the supermarket.
Really? Do you still have that copy?
No, but it was several volumes, like 20 volumes. But my brother was reading novels and I was reading the encyclopedia. I'm pretty good at crosswords, so
I'll bet. My gosh! So you just that was your go-to-bed reading? You'd break out a big encyclopedia?
And just pick it up and go where it led, or think something, go to another volume, or just read through. Or
you got to talk about both sides of the brain and the marriage of fact and story. So you get that, and then you develop the story in your brain on your own.
Yeah, I guess.
All right, the book or books you're reading now?
So I'm reading a lot of different things. I'm reading a biography of Alfred Hitchcock, which is just a wonderful thing. And I just started 2 days ago Anna Karenina for the second time. I'm very much into Tolstoy. I love Russian literature. I love, love, love it. And have had at various times in my life just huge immersions in Russian literature. And I have, Tolstoy wrote a calendar of wisdom, a daily sort of set of mostly religious, spiritual, you'd call them not aphorisms, but just sort of thoughts and whatever. And I participate almost daily in kind of interpreting them. So I just really wanted to go back to the fictional source of him. And I am reading constantly about the American Revolution because that's what I'm working on, and on Reconstruction because that's a project that's upcoming called Emancipation to Exodus.
Any other books that come to mind that you have gone back to read multiple times?
Oh yes. Most of Twain and most of Willa Cather, who I still submit that Pioneers and My Antonia may, when we presume that a male has written the great American novel, I just go,
Willa Cather. Yeah.
Let's talk about Willa Cather.
To our earlier conversation, The Sun Also Rises is one that I tend to read every 5 to 8 years.
That's actually on my nightstand because it's that. And A Farewell to Arms is at my foot. I've got a chest and it's piled high with books, and so there's a lot of stuff that I like. And I always keep the short stories because sometimes I work really hard. Sometimes 18-hour days. So beginning to read is to fall asleep, right? And so, and I'm reading all the time during the day with particular to the work. But I know that if I just need like a heroin fix of art to read one of the stories of Hemingway, there's 10 of them, Hills Like White Elephants, The Short Happy Life of Francis Macomber, Up in Michigan, Indian Camp. These are I can read them 10 times a year and never get tired and just hear the cadence of it. Sometimes I'll be alone in my bedroom and I'll read them out loud just to hear how they sound. Oh,
that's great. It's a nice little reprieve after a long day. People relax in different ways. That's a great way to do
dessert.
It. All right. Now, here's a cliched question. But everyone's going to want to know your answer in particular to this. You're setting up the dinner. You can invite 3 guests. Let's assume there are 2 different dinners. Dinner 1 is 3 guests who are currently living.
Living.
Dinner 2 is 3 guests.
I live in the past. I'm going to have to do two dead people, 2 dead dinners.
Okay.
So now Leonardo for sure, and Louis Armstrong and Abraham Lincoln. That's my all-time favorite dinner now. Now that I've done Leonardo, but it used to be Armstrong and Lincoln for the longest time. I think they're just. I think Armstrong's the most important person in the history of music. I didn't say jazz in the 20th century. He is to music. I didn't say jazz. What Einstein is to physics, what the Wright brothers are to travel, what Freud is to medicine. I just think we just underestimate this person who took a an ensemble music and turned it into a soloist art. I mean, Duke Ellington saw him on Times Square and said, I want him on every instrument, meaning he had to develop not just virtuosity, but personality and everything. And he did this. And then he did it. He reinvented American singing and did it with a heart so capacious that he is, to this moment, blowing Gabriel out of the clouds.
So I'm not that familiar with him. Was he just extraordinarily gifted? Did he work at it harder than anyone else? How did he transcend? Almost
nobody in jazz agrees with anything except that he's a gift from God or an angel. He's the person. He's there there in the place where it was created. He did not create it, but he took it north to Chicago first, then to New York, and in the early day he played before and after a note, and it in the early days of swing, they called it orchestrated Armstrong. And I think that because he had the handkerchief, and we know him as Hello, Dolly, and It's a Wonderful Life, that we forget the extraordinary thing. And I would just direct everybody to, there's a 4-volume CD set called Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, and it's the best stuff. Nothing's equaled it, and everybody is a successor to him. Even those who went in a different direction, like bebop. Dizzy Gillespie said, "No him, no me," meaning Armstrong. And I think you can trace it all the way to even the John Coltrane and others who are off in some extraordinary space. They still swing, and he's the guy who swung better than anybody.
I have not seen your documentary Jazz. That'll be my next stop.
He's the revelation for me. I've never been so surprised. Lincoln, obviously, I don't need to say anything, but even his writings today are as relevant now as they were, perhaps even more so.
All right, favorite movie of all time that's not a documentary?
Seven Samurai by Akira Kurosawa.
I don't know that one. What's the...
It's 3 hours and 12 minutes that go by faster than anything I've ever seen. It's the story of these unemployed ronin, I think you'd call them now, unemployed samurai down on their luck that are hired by this impoverished village because every year they plant their crops and every year the thieves come and take it. And it's defending this village against the thieves, and it is exciting as anything. It was made into an American Western called The Magnificent Seven.
Okay, yeah.
But it's the
what
original
year did
one.
Seven Samurai come out then?
It's like 56, 57. It's like one of the greatest films. It's my favorite film if I had to take it. There's lots of great directors like Luis Buñuel that I mentioned before, The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie, Viridiana, Los Olvidados, Belle de Jour, Tristana. I mean, there's great films by him. Orson Welles, has got, with Citizen Kane and Magnificent Amberson and Touch of Evils. Alfred Hitchcock has 20 great films, of living people, Francis Ford Coppola and The Godfather and The Conversation. And
yes, Gene Hackman in The Conversation.
Gene Hackman in The Conversation is really, really terrific film. Marty Scorsese is alive and doing. Michael Mann is sort of the successor to Howard Hawks, kind of masculine and about men doing their work, whether it's Collateral with Tom Cruise in a completely playing against type, gray-haired assassin that's taken over Jamie Foxx's cab for the night as he goes around killing people. It's professionalism of the kind you can see in Rio Bravo with John Wayne and Dean Martin and Ricky Nelson and Angie and the exquisite Angie Dickinson.
Yeah. Well, that's a good list for everyone listening. I've got movies to watch now. Last question for the great Ken Burns. One piece of advice for the audience.
It's two. One is Socratic. That is to say, know yourself. That's the most important thing. Leonardo reinforces it. People get drawn to say, my job of filmmaking, out of some sense it's glamorous. It's not. It's a lot of hard work. And then I think the most important thing is about persevering. It's about putting one foot instead of the other. There's lots of more talented filmmakers than me, and yet I had those hundreds of rejections for Brooklyn Bridge, and I know that as much as these two things sound like platitudes, that people want to know, I want to be a filmmaker, what do I do? Which school do I go to? What lens do I use? What filters none of that matters. You'll discover it all if you're true to thyself. That's biblical as well. and persevere, because it's nothing's going to be handed, or the things that are rewarding require overcoming the inertia and the friction of the inevitable vicissitudes of life.
Oh, that's great. Ken, thank you so much for coming in.
Oh, it's
awesome.
my pleasure. This has been awesome. Thank you.